Welcome to Asia Pacific Defense Reporter, your go-to source for cutting-edge security insights in the region. Get ready for rapid-fire analysis and commentary from the Asia Pacific with your host, Kim Bergman.
Hello and welcome back. I'm recording this podcast in Singapore. I'm up here covering the air show, so in the next podcast, hopefully I'll have a bit to say about the detail of that. I'm going to try and spend a bit of time with the company Singapore Technologies to understand a bit more about how this country is pursuing a path of sort of semi-self-reliance when it comes to defence technology. Anyway, just for something a little bit different, because the last few episodes have been very heavy on US politics, and there'll be a bit more of that soon, I thought I'd start with some information about the People's Republic of China, because Sino watchers have been very excited in the last few weeks about a major military purge. The inner workings of the Chinese government are still a little bit of a mystery, but the most important body in terms of military activities is something called the Central Military Commission, and the Sino watchers are debating whether or not this purge makes the invasion of Taiwan less likely. And the consensus seems to be, in the short term, the answer is probably yes. Now, this body, the Central Military Commission, used to have 7 members, and that's now down to 2, one of whom is President Xi Jinping himself, and the other is sort of a political commissar who is believed to have not much specific military knowledge. So his President Xi's former tight grip on the military now looks to be total. As I say, the other guy is sort of just an anti-corruption officer. And this is just the latest in a series of purges that seem to be based on a mixture of anti-corruption and personal loyalty tests. So we now have the President of China alone in charge of, this enormous military, 4 million soldiers, the world's largest navy, going by the number of ships, and an estimated 600 nuclear warheads, pretty much all under his personal control. And the danger is that while this might limit the chances of an invasion of Taiwan in the short term, say the next 2 or 3 years, there's an obvious danger that this sort of group of old guys who you can assume to be, cautious and rational, if they are replaced by younger, far more aggressive fanatics and nationalists who might be eager for war, the outlook, in fact, could be more concerning rather than less. Now, as I say, the inner workings of the Chinese Politburo and the People's Liberation Army are obscure to the West, and perhaps the only interpretation of the purges is that Xi is unhappy with the military state of readiness, and as I say, he might have had some doubts about whether senior officers are sufficiently loyal to him. And by the way, this latter concern is precisely how Donald Trump is seeking to restructure the entire US government, not just the military, getting rid of competent people and replacing them with complete MAGA ideologues. So, speaking of the US, let's move back to that major topic. Chaos continues in the form of, threats of more tariffs on Canada. I saw recently that the US ambassador in Ottawa has tried to strong-arm the Canadians into buying 88 F-35s. I've mentioned in previous episodes that Canada is on the hook for an initial 18, and there's a very vigorous debate going on about, in the light of US threats directed against Canada, whether they should buy that full order or whether the balance of the order should go to, say, Saab for Gripen fighter aircraft. Clearly, the Trump administration believes that no matter how unpleasant and aggressive they behave towards Ottawa, they should still go ahead with the full F-35 order. The ambassador has said if Canada does not buy all 88 F-35s, then the US reserves the right to treat Canadian airspace as entirely their own, and they'll fly their own air patrols over the region no matter what. Now, to an extent, they can do that anyway because of an existing agreement about NORAD, air defense contract. But the US is basically implying, it's sort of blackmail. Buy the rest of the F-35s or, nice country that you used to have there. And I observe, and I've said this several times. Oh, and by the way, a bit of interesting news. The Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is scheduled to visit Australia in March and will be addressing Parliament, and I'm very, very much looking forward to that, because as the world, particularly Canada, decouples from Washington, the big question for me is, why aren't we? And I've previously urged, as listeners and readers know, a lot more regional engagement, particularly when it comes to defence cooperation, with other medium-sized powers such as South Korea, Japan, Indonesia, and, of course, Singapore. Japan's probably more than a medium-sized power, but we'll get there. So, given Canada's public desire to restructure their security arrangements, basically decoupling from the United States, why aren't we talking with them? Canada has some very capable companies such as Bombardier on the aerospace front, and CEA, one of the world leaders in simulation technology, and that company already has a very nice footprint in Australia. And so here are some ideas. Perhaps Canada and Australia could join South Korea's KF-21 program with the fully stealth Block 3 aircraft in mind. At the moment, the F-35 is the only Western world's fifth-generation aircraft in full-rate production. But the Koreans are in the process of catching up, and if you look at the timeline for moving the KF-21, at the moment it carries a lot of its weapons externally, but there's a development program, an update program in mind, and by the early 2030s, it is anticipated that Korea will have fully stealth twin jet aircraft in full-rate production. Australia and Canada, we do have the problem of needing more advanced aircraft in the 2030s, and I think the KF-21 could be a very, very realistic option for both countries. Now, Canada is also in the process of selecting new conventional submarine designs from either Germany or the Republic of Korea. Canadian submarines need a great deal of range, since the country is so big, and the submarines also need considerable underwater endurance because of the need to spend quite a lot of time under the ice. So let's talk to them and understand what it is that they are hoping to get from their conventionally powered submarines. And remember, the US was meant to sell nuclear-powered submarines to Canada in the late 1980s, but changed their mind and pulled the plug. Well, what a surprise. And I've dealt with that previously. And this is what astounds me about Australian politicians and defence officials. How on earth can they possibly believe that their relationship, or Australia's relationship, with the US is stronger than the British special relationship or the Canadian special relationship? Is our special relationship in a different category? Is ours a special super-duper relationship? Perhaps we should be calling it an extra special relationship with cherries on top to distinguish itself from the ordinary special relationships of other countries. Now, in a previous paragraph, having mentioned Indonesia in passing as one of the countries that I think we could have closer relations with, I saw President Prabowo Subianto was at the launch of President Trump's latest con, the so-called Board of Peace in Davos. I'll come back to that later. I hope Australia has nothing to do with it, this Board of Peace, though I imagine there are plenty of lickspittles in federal parliament who would like nothing better than to give Trump a personal joining fee of $1 billion. There have been credible media reports that Australia is going to decline to be involved in that, and I really hope that that is true. But, generally speaking, our defence officials and ministers are acting like rabbits stuck in the headlights. They remain so dazzled by the US that they are completely hypnotised, unable to move at all. Now, as I've mentioned previously, when it comes to some US domestic politics, and I did go into this in a previous episode, but I think it's worth repeating, even though it seems now, given the speed of the news cycle, to be kind of old news. But what I find equally shocking about the killing of 2 US citizens in Minneapolis by ICE agents, this was about a fortnight ago, well, 2 weeks ago and 3 weeks ago, is the instant willingness of the US government up to and including President Trump to lie so blatantly about it. And I see that this seems to be resonating in the US. And that's why I've previously urged anyone interested in this particular grisly matter to go on and watch for themselves what happened. And there's plenty of footage available, because the point is this: when it comes to matters of national security, and I always try and swing back to that, when the administration lies so blatantly and so obviously about the murder of US citizens, why do our officials and politicians believe that these people in the US administration are telling the truth about things such as AUKUS and the supposed strength of the alliance? Because surely it's logical that if people are proven liars in one field, does that not contaminate everything else that they say? Because, of course, popular theme for me, Australia is in the process of handing over billions of dollars, billions with a B, to an administration that simply does not tell the truth. This is like a person buying a second-hand car from a convicted fraudster and then being disappointed with the result. And that analogy I find is especially apt, given supposedly that if the first 2 submarines from the United States are ever delivered, they will in fact be 15-year-old second-hand clunkers. And of course, the people in the US have given us verbal assurances that the submarines will be in tip-top condition. But again, why would anyone believe anything this administration says? And by the way, Secretary of War Pete Hegseth is cut from exactly this sort of same cloth that I refer to. And for people who missed the last episode, he is one of this brigade of American military and national security figures who says that only Americans did the fighting in Afghanistan. And what an insult. All of that is for other countries who voluntarily came to the assistance of the US after 9/11, including Australia. A bit of procurement news. I see that the US company L3 Harris has delivered 4 of Australia's electronic warfare and ISR aircraft, known as MC-55A Peregrines, to the United States Air Force for sort of acceptance testing. That's good because and I highlight this because so much money is being siphoned off into AUKUS and nuclear-powered submarines in particular that the other services will be struggling for at least the next 15 years on the current trajectory to be fielding any new equipment. But at least the Peregrines are a partial exception to that, even though the program is a couple of years late. But I'll say in this context, the delivery of these aircraft, to the US Air Force and then to the RAAF, is just a further reminder that submarines are not much use in any air battle, and they also aren't much use in land combat, despite their ability to fire a limited number of land strike missiles. Submarines cannot capture and hold enemy territory. Submarines cannot protect Australia against incoming enemy bombers, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles. What Australia needs is a balanced force, but we are putting just about all of our eggs in the nuclear-powered submarine basket. What else? I note that UK defence procurement seems to be in bad shape, and there are doubts about whether they can fund their military wish list, which is just another lead-in, if you like, for my suggestion that we have a proper review of AUKUS and where it is going. I'll just swing back to the United States and say that the country is experiencing a self-imposed brain drain. And again, I'm going to try and phrase this in terms of national security, because in this day and age, the bigger a technology base a country has, the greater is its ability to develop high-tech military systems. I think that's pretty obvious. But this US brain drain, foreign students are being discouraged from remaining in the United States by numerous measures, including a $100,000 visa charge if you want to remain in the US after completing your degree. And the US federal government has engaged in a mass purge from its own ranks. I mean, part of this is Elon Musk and DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, so-called. And do you know that in the past year, the federal workforce has lost more than 10,000 STEM PhDs, according to analysis? Yes, that number is correct. The losses were disproportionately large in some agencies. The National Science Foundation lost about 40% of its doctorate-holding experts. And the reason why I mention this is that some countries are positioning themselves to take advantage of the US destroying its own scientific base, and Canada looks to be a good case in point. And again, when Mark Carney visits in March, I'm looking forward to hearing more from him about that. I think that, well, I need to study Canada in more detail because Carney, a central banker, has put measures in place that have done things to attract, for example, a major shift in Amazon, moving operations from the US to Canada. I also understand that a similar pattern is underway with the US space industry facing huge cutbacks. Congress has reinstated some of those, but not all, and anyway, it's a general atmosphere of chaos. So people are leaving the US and relocating to Canada. So Canada, as I say, is seeing this as an opportunity. What is Australia doing? Nothing that I'm aware of. You know, taking advantage of large numbers of US scientists and researchers seems unlikely, because in November, the government cut a further 350 jobs from CSIRO, coming on top of an earlier 800 sackings. And I'll move to a conclusion by saying this importance of science and technology, research and development is well understood in many countries, such as I'm here in Singapore, and this government is committed to investing 1% of GDP into science, technology, engineering and maths, artificial intelligence, research and development, all of that sort of stuff, with the aim of being a global high-technology hub. Whereas Australia, sadly, appears to be moving in the opposite direction. And as I'm running out of time, I'll just use the final few seconds to plug a major interview currently or just available in the online edition of Asia Pacific Reporter, and that's an interview I've conducted with Eugene Kim, who I have the pleasure of knowing quite well. Eugene is from South Korea. He is the president of the Korean Defense Industry Association and also chairman of Huneed Technologies, a very high-tech company that's into additive manufacturing and advanced communication systems. And as people know, I've been a strong advocate for closer links with South Korea. Please read that interview, because Eugene Kim explains in a large amount of detail why it is that Korean industry has been so successful. I believe that there are some very, very important lessons for the Australian government and Australian companies in all of that. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye for now, and I will record the next podcast at the conclusion of the Singapore Air Show.
That's today's Asia Pacific Defence Reporter. For more in-depth articles, expert opinions and exclusive interviews, visit AsiaPacificDefenceReporter.com. Stay informed, stay ahead. This is your source for all things defence. Until next time.